By 1864, Wagner's life had reached its lowest ebb. He was no longer a young firebrand in danger of being imprisoned for his revolutionary politics. He was a 50-year-old in danger of being imprisoned for his simply astonishing debt. He'd written Tristan, but that had been declared unproducible by most people who had seen it or tried to rehearse it. His relationship with Mathilde Wiesendonck was over, his marriage was over, it seemed his career was over, all that bright promise. And how could he possibly give the world these preposterously ambitious music dramas? If he were to write a wish list, I suppose he'd come up with one thing. He would need someone so powerful, so extraordinarily rich, that they could write off his debts, they could build him the theatre he wanted, they could guarantee him the posterity that he knew his genius merited. But that would be asking for a miracle. On March the 10th, 1864, a miracle happened. Quite unexpectedly, Maximilian II, King of Bavaria, died. He left his opulent kingdom to his son Ludwig, a handsome, eccentric 18-year-old. And one of Ludwig's first actions on acceding to the throne was to send for his hero, the artist he most adored in all the world, Richard Wagner.
Ludwig was offering to pay off all his debts and bankroll his future work. And if that wasn't proof enough of his passion, he went on to build what must surely be the world's most extravagant fan letter, Schloss Neuschwanstein. It wasn't completed until 1886, 3 years after Wagner's death, so he never had a chance to wander through these extraordinary spaces, all inspired by his work. But he had something even better. With the king's blank cheque to work with, his lifelong dream of artistic freedom must finally have seemed attainable.
What a patron to have.
But there's another character who can't be kept out of the story any longer. Even though for someone like me with Jewish blood in their veins, it would be simpler and so much happier if he'd never been a part of it all. Hitler fell in love with Wagner's music when he was a young man with dreams of becoming an artist himself. By the time he first visited Bayreuth in 1923, he had traded painting for politics. He came to meet this man, British-born writer Houston Stewart Chamberlain, who was married to one of Wagner's daughters. Chamberlain was a racist who championed Aryan supremacy and vilified the Jews. He saw in Hitler a man of destiny who would finish the job Wagner had begun by forging a new and culturally pure Germany. Long before he became Chancellor, Hitler was embraced by some in Bayreuth with open arms.
It wasn't a question of welcoming Hitler because, in a sort of cowardly custard fashion, he was the great leader of Germany and they didn't dare offend him. Quite the opposite. They actually pushed him forward. They supported him from a very early age. 1923 was just a few years after the First World War when Hitler was a nobody. He was a corporal who'd left the front and come to join the turmoil of post-war Germany.
That was just the beginning of a relationship between Hitler, some members of the Wagner family, and Bayreuth, which would cause lasting damage to the reputation of the festival house and to Wagner's music. I'd like to think it is possible to salvage it from all those dark associations, to rescue it from Hitler's grasp. But I also have to consider a more disturbing possibility. Are the qualities which first drew me to Wagner's music, its emotional force and directness, the same ones that made the music so apt for Nazi exploitation?
Joachim, I'm familiar with the idea that whenever there's footage of the Nuremberg rallies with Hitler standing on that podium over there, usually someone has decided to play Wagner in the background.
There's a certain scene that triggered in him, I think, that whole rally idea.
Yeah.
It was the third act. There you have all the guilds of Nuremberg marching onto the stage, and you have like costume masses carrying flags and their guild signs and symbols, and they're singing together. It's a wonderful scene, but it's definitely a political manifestation. And this is on the small stage of the opera, and then transferred or even translated into reality in this huge field here in Nuremberg.
So they perverted the style of Wagner, if you like, the emotional impact of the music and the grandeur and the spectacle, which does have an enormous effect on audiences who love Wagner. You do get turned into a jelly by the end of the evening.
Yes.
It's so extreme.
Yes. That was the first step. The second was that he thought one could teach the Germans to see the world in a way which you find in Wagner operas, in a dialectical way, that you have a protagonist and an antagonist, that you have a good and an evil. Now, if you have this in the opera, it is perfectly all right, because the opera needs the tension of drama between the good and the evil. But as soon as you turn it into reality, it becomes a devastating political fantasy and ideology.
Monstrous example of the way Wagner's music inspires some men to tear down the boundary which ought to separate fantasy from fact.
And I don't want to hedge around here. I am deeply uncomfortable in Nuremberg talking about Wagner. I realize how close to the Nazi fantasy world Wagner was, and how deeply stitched into Hitler's vision of the world. It's very difficult. I have to keep reminding myself, and I do it best by simply listening to the music, how unbelievably complicated, ambiguous, emotionally honest, raw, revolutionary, anti-fascist Wagner truly is. And I'm afraid Hitler and Nazism have stained Wagner. For some people, that stain ruins the whole work. For others, it is just something you have to face up to. And here's a place, as storm clouds gather in Nuremberg.
The link between Wagner's music and the odious extravaganzas staged here is bad enough. Worse still are the stories of it being used as a psychological weapon in the concentration camps.
People have this idea that in the death camps that Wagner was playing in the background all the time, as it were. And I'm here talking to you as a survivor of one of the death camps, the most famous of them all, the dreaded and horrific Auschwitz.
Well, we certainly didn't play Wagner.
You did not?
No, we didn't play Wagner. First of all, you must realize what this band, or Kapelle as we used to call it, consisted of. You couldn't have played Wagner if you tried.
Right, Wagner does demand a big orchestra.
And you know, blowing instruments. I can't speak for the other camps, but I don't think Wagner was particularly played.
It's really extraordinary. I find every time I see a Wagner piece, a music drama, as he would call it, an opera is the easiest way to call it, although it's as if it's absolutely new. So although they are very long, and I understand why 5 hours, you know, it seems like a long time with people singing and standing in one place, singing or screaming sometimes. And yet, because of what the music does underneath with the drama, it's as if it's an enormous conversation, and your mind goes on a journey of connecting all kinds of emotional states and all kinds of philosophical thoughts. I mean, I know it sounds so pretentious. I'm fully aware of how embarrassing it can be to try and explain.
Why do you have to listen to Wagner and Bayreuth, which is so somehow symbolic for everything terrible that has happened? And why can't you just sit at home and listen to the record?
That's a very good question. I think I've spent my life listening to the records and loving it. I've never been to Bayreuth. Wagner built the theatre specifically for it, and I suppose it's a way of completing a part of the sort of my life with Wagner as it's been. Maybe I'll be disappointed.
Hey, Jesus, clean, you ain't gonna light board, and I can't get used to it. I'm used to a heavy board.
I know, it's a real drag.
Do you prefer a heavy or a light board?
Heavier.
Really?
Yeah.
I thought all the young guys like lighter boards.
You can't write the nose on those things.
Big Duke 6, this is Eagle Thrust 7. We've got it spotted.
Big Duke 6 to Eagle Thrust. Put on heading 270. Assume attack formation.